Hurricane Harvey has just been upgraded to a Category 4 storm with winds of at least 130 miles an hour.
So that's the breaking news. It is now a Category 4 storm, whipping winds of 130 miles an hour.
There will be catastrophic damage to property. The seriousness cannot be overstated. Right now, we're getting wind gusts of up to 50 and 55 miles per hour sustained. It's a ghost town around here. If you take a look, you can tell how the trees are blowing. You got a lot of boats in the area. And as we look down this street, really on the road right now, it's nothing but police and people out sightseeing, taking pictures. If you live in the Corpus Christi area and you're hoping to get a ride out of town, officials say it's too late. People have been taken to a shelter in San Antonio, but no more bus rides are being given. If you have not left, the police say they cannot come and get you if something happens. You are on your own from this.
Storm. So it has increased to a Category 4 storm. Winds are at 130 miles an hour, so we have not seen any strength weakening of this storm. If you guys put up weather 8 behind me, I'll show you a couple things here. But a Category 4 hurricane right at landfall, a strengthening hurricane right at landfall is not what you want to see. A strengthening hurricane actually transports more of the winds down to the surface and is a dangerous thing. We saw this with the Hurricane Charlie and Hurricane Wilma. And take a look at this imagery right here, Martha. We have a new satellite, GO-16. It's the first time we've seen a hurricane on it. This right here, you see all of the storms right around the center of it. Center of it just around 20 miles offshore. The eye wall is going to be moving right on shore here, kind of between Corpus Christi and up towards Port Lavaca. Not a lot of population right here, which is good news, but Corpus Christi right on one side of it, Port Lavaca right on the other side of it. That means that's where the strongest of the winds are going to be, and the storm surge already pulling in here, and in the next hour or so, it's going to be catastrophic. This is now also moving much slower, so its forward progression, instead of being at 10 miles an hour, is now at 7 miles an hour. That means it's just a slower moving storm. We thought this was going to happen. That's saying 8 miles an hour. I think it's 7 actually. But it's going to continue to pull towards the northwest and eventually kind of stall out. But you get the idea. We have seen the heaviest of the, at least on the radar imagery, the heaviest of the storms right on kind of the front side of it. It's filling in around again back on the other side. And if you've got a strengthening storm, that certainly would be indicative of what we're going to see. Bad news for the storm surge right here. Certainly in the short term, it's about to get really bad. The other bad news is the storm surge doesn't go away anytime soon, because even though the storm kind of pulls offshore, it's moving so slowly and stalls and then drifts back towards the south again. And that means that we're going to continue to see an onshore flow here, continuing to keep all of that water in these bays. Storm surge, probably 12 feet. Imagine what that 12 feet, I'm almost 6 feet tall, double my height of a storm surge. And then rainfall totals 3 to 4 to 5 feet on top of that, because the storm gets stuck here Wednesday into Thursday of this coming week, Martha.
I mean, this thing built up a tremendous amount of force over the past 48 hours.
Yeah.
Now a Category 4 storm, and something that really nobody anticipated was going to get to this magnitude.
Urgent warnings going out, evacuations underway at this hour, flights already being canceled. Families stocking up for what could be nearly 3 feet of rain. And if the forecast is right, it would be the first Category 3 to make landfall in the U.S.
When it comes ashore late tomorrow or early Saturday, it could be the first major hurricane to hit the U.S. in 12 years, with winds over 125 miles an hour. Storm surges and as much as 30 inches of rain could bring what the National Weather Service.
Along the Texas coast tonight, people are boarding up.
Tighten it at the bottom, really tight.
Piling sandbags around homes and businesses. and leaving store shelves empty as they stock up on food and water. All in preparation for Hurricane Harvey, expected to make landfall as a Category 3 and cause potentially catastrophic damage. Some towns like Port Aransas issued mandatory evacuations. Others like Corpus Christi have only called for voluntary evacuations. Mayor Joe McComb. Dionisia Cervantes and Harold Page are doing just that, leaving their new home on Padre Island with only their safe and some artwork.
We just bought the house. We've only been in there, what, less than 30 days?
It's kind of sad because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to come back to a home or what damage we're coming home to.
The last hurricane to hit Texas was Ike in 2008, which packed winds above 140 miles per hour and killed 113 people in the U.S. Powerful winds aren't the only danger. Storm surge, water pushed on shore by the force of the winds, is the greatest threat to life, responsible for nearly half of hurricane fatalities. For the first time, the National Weather Service issued an official storm surge warning, covering most of the Texas coastline. Surge levels could rise up to 12 feet north of Padre Island. That still wasn't enough to convince Amy Watson to evacuate and leave the restaurant she manages.
I don't want looters to come in after it hits and all that, so I just want to stay around and keep an eye on everything.
Is there anything anyone could tell you to change your mind and say, be safe and get out?
Probably not.
Wow.
No, probably not.
We are coming on the air for breaking news. Hurricane Harvey barreling into the Texas coastline as a Category 4 storm with 130-mile-an-hour winds. It's the first Category 4 storm to hit the U.S. in over a decade, threatening record rain totals of up to 35 inches throughout much of Texas that could render some areas uninhabitable for months. More than 150,000 people at this hour plunged into darkness, the president declaring a federal disaster for the state, and we are already hearing reports of significant damage, of collapsed buildings, of people perhaps trapped under the rubble, spread out along the coast as thousands flee the path of destruction. Take a look at the radar picture right now, and you can see where Hurricane Harvey is. The eye of the storm recently passed over Rockport, Texas. And joining us now from Rockport is the fire chief there, Steve Sims. Steve, I know you've been a firefighter for 13 years. What kind of damage are you beginning to see tonight?
A lot of fairly severe. We haven't been able to get out and really look at things much other than what's right around close to our station. The eye wall just passed over us, and our wind has picked back up again, so we're hunkered down in our main station. And
there are reports that there are several buildings, including a high school, that have partially collapsed. There's reports that there are seniors trapped in a senior center there. Will you attempt rescue operations in the middle of the night?
Not with the wind like it is right now. We have nothing that, to get on the highway with. Our hands are tied, and it's killing all of us.
I'm sure as first responders, that must be the hardest thing, to have to sit and wait.
Very much.
And yet, what is your community going through tonight? I mean, clearly people are bracing for many more hours, if not days, for this storm's damage to get unleashed.
Oh, most definitely. We've been hunkered down since early evening. And like I say, the eye wall just passed over us.
And it must be quiet now, and yet 130-mile-an-hour winds, what does that sound like in the fire department when you went over you?
The best way I can describe it is a tin can being kicked down the road.
The predictions are very serious. Meteorologists at the National Hurricane Center say they expect Harvey to be a major storm, a Category 3 at least, with winds topping 110 miles an hour by the time it makes landfall late Friday night into Saturday morning. The target area, they never want to be too specific, but anywhere from the central part of the Texas Gulf Coast up to the Houston and Galveston area. If predictions hold, Harvey will be the first major hurricane to hit the U.S. in 12 years. Then the Hurricane Center says it expects it to stall and dump heavy rains for days.
This storm hasn't let up. What it has done is change direction. The wind now coming from behind me, bearing ever more rain. The major concern right now is getting to the people who need help. But power outages are rampant throughout this part of Texas. 120,000 people in and around Corpus Christi without power right now, and there's all sorts of debris in the roadway. Just a few minutes ago, we've seen panel after panel of plexiglass essentially explode off the building, scattering all over the street here. You don't see it, but I'm actually standing on part of it that blew off the building. These are the kinds of hazards that rescuers are facing, and it's why they're struggling so mightily to get out, to get people the help that they need. Even damage assessments at this point are nearly impossible with this deluge coming down, the streets blackened, and all of this debris out on the roadways. Now, it's going to be some time before rescuers are able to get to everybody who needs it. They're talking about hurricane force winds in and around Rockport. That's the town that really got battered by the eye of the storm for another 12 hours. They're going to see hurricane force winds until 8 p.m. tomorrow. This is a very serious situation. The reason we're seeing 17,000 National Guardsmen called up, and again, we don't know how bad it is. We are right here in Corpus Christi, but this whole area along the coast has just been battered. Now, we went to Rockport earlier. We saw it was basically a ghost town. There was a mandatory evacuation. The mayor telling people, if you stay, you better write your name and your social security number with a Sharpie on your arm because you might die. And that is apparently the situation there. It is very, very concerning. And farther up the coast, we're seeing the same types of things. What is going to be happening now over the next couple of hours and days is reinforcements are going to be coming in as much as they can, but so many of these areas are low-lying. The roads just to get in there are going to be inundated. We're talking about this 12-foot storm surge, so just getting to these people and getting them help is going to be very difficult, very trying in the coming hours and days. Juju.
With Hurricane Harvey's outer bands already gouging the coastline, the Gulf Coast is in a frenzy of boarding up, sandbagging, and fleeing. A mass exodus now underway in several Texas towns, including Port Aransas, where there's a mandatory evacuation tonight. The storm whipping itself up from a tropical depression into a full-blown hurricane in just a few hours today, triggering alarm bells from Corpus Christi, Texas to New Orleans, and some very stark warnings.
We are going to, in the strongest possible terms, encourage the residents in the low-lying areas, as they say, get out of Dodge.
Helping folks get out of Dodge, airlines waiving change and cancellation fees for those in the storm's path. In Corpus Christi, they're swarming hardware stores.
Folks are buying sandbags by the pallet full here, but the line to pick them up here stretches around the block. Some folks saying it's 3.5 hours long.
Inside Sutherland's Hardware, clerks scrambling.
No half inch at all.
The line for plywood 30 minutes long, customers on edge.
Everybody just went to Code Red, and we all came basically just to prepare ourselves.
Yeah, I'm 65 now, and I don't want to die at 65.
In Houston, where the storm is forecast to dump a biblical deluge, shelves picked clean.
There's no more water. There's no more bread. The bread's already running out as well.
Cars lining up for hours at gas stations.
This is the line to get gas. Absolute insanity over this hurricane.
In New Orleans earlier this month, a summer squall flooded streets. There's now concern the city's pumps won't be able to keep up.
We're in a more vulnerable space than we should be in.
Millions of people are likely to feel the direct impact of the storm, but the entire country could be affected. But also in the storm's path, some 20 refineries producing 4 million barrels of oil. But it doesn't take a hurricane to wreak destruction. Tropical Storm Allison in 2001 caused $5 billion in damage.
All of that response here in Washington, we expected to be covering solely the federal response to the storm. But the president has delivered 2 more headlines. We'll get to both, but let's start with Harvey. The president is updating Twitter followers through the night just before 1 a.m., tweeting that his administration is fully engaged with open lines of communication, and to those in the storm's path, that America is with you. Earlier, the president tweeted he had signed a disaster proclamation, that at the request of Texas Governor Greg Abbott, to unleash, in his words, the full force of government help.
This makes federal funding, of course, available to recovery efforts, expected to have a very large bill. Now, that news came just before 10 p.m. East Coast time, letting local authorities know they are not alone, but also marking the first test in how well this administration will handle the storm, how effective it can be in an emergency. And speaking of effective, this president has been multitasking since the storm started. About 15 minutes after that news broke, there you see him going to Camp David. Again on Twitter from Camp David, the president announced that he has granted a full pardon to controversial former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Arpaio, who's 85, was facing up to 6 months in prison. He was convicted for criminal contempt of court for ignoring orders to stop detaining suspected undocumented immigrants. Arpaio was an early and outspoken supporter of the president. The two closely aligned in support of building a wall on the border with Mexico. Now, there was quick backlash to that from here in Washington, all over the country, from Arizona. Senator John McCain in a statement saying that pardon undermines Trump's claim to respect the rule of law. Now, that is a big headline, but it's not all. Before the night was over, the president released a presidential memorandum directing the Pentagon to ban transgender people from joining the U.S. military. That memorandum instructs the Department of Defense to stop funding transgender-related treatments. It's a ban that took military leaders by surprise, and it comes on the same day. In his weekly address, the president said, "Every person who puts on the uniform makes our country proud." A lot of news, Juju, not only about Harvey, but all those other headlines, and we'll be following them all.
A lot of headlines, a lot of news to absorb. But President Trump has also said that he may visit Texas as early as next week.
He has, and of course, you and I have covered a lot of these. If you look back over history, of course, Hurricane Katrina comes to mind, and President Bush took a lot of heat for not going to the area. It was several days during Hurricane Katrina until Vice President at the time, Dick Cheney, arrived on the scene. Now, the president saying he will go down to Texas sounds very good coming from the White House. Of course, many of the people there, a presidential visit would have a great significance, but it may cause a headache for all of the responders on the ground there, all of the logistics that go into keeping the president safe and getting him in and out of the area. As Kate has been saying all evening, this storm expected to go on and on and on. So that news from the White House, we'll see what comes of it. But you're right, the president again saying he will get to the region as soon as he can.